Alrighty, why don't we get started, and we can give, we'll start with introductions so a few more people can join in, but appreciate everyone jumping on the phone this morning and jumping on the webinar this morning and joining us for our Rumble in the Roots events. And what this event's really going to be doing is highlighting our SmartStax Pro with rnai technology and reviewing what it is, how it works, all of that. And then we're also going to show some exciting data results that we've received from our 2021 trials. So today you're going to hear from me. I'm Travis Kaufman. I'm the Corn and Regional Crops Traits Marketing Manager. Then you're going to hear from Safir Hassan, who's our Corn Systems Manager, and he's going to be talking about the data. And then Ryan Titchich, our North America Market Development Corn Agronomic Systems Lead. Man, that title is about as long as mine. Is going to join us and talk at the end, and then we're all going to join in for Q&A. So before we kind of dive into the meat of the presentation, I did want to bring up just some housekeeping items. First of all, we hope and we would appreciate some Q&A. So here in the Zoom chat, you can utilize the Q&A function and send us questions as they pop up throughout the event. We'll make sure that we jump on those at the end of the event once we present everything. And we'll stay on as long as the questions keep coming. So feel free to insert any questions you may have. We've also got a chat function in the tool. You can message anyone through that. I will ask though that if you please put all your questions in the Q&A so we can track that. And then if you have any audio issues, there should be an audio setting in your Zoom tool as well as to help you out through that. But if you have any issues, use that chat and some of our administrators can help you through some of those issues as well. But hopefully we've done enough Zoom meetings throughout the COVID world that will be excerpts by now. In terms of the agenda, so I'm going to kick things off and we're going to do a quick overview on our SmartStax Pro with rnai technology. Then like it talks about, Safir is going to talk through our corn rootworm management system trials and kind of give an overview of what those look like, how we rated different things, and then give you some examples of what we saw out in the field. And then Ryan's going to come back and just talk key takeaways, and then we'll join in on a Q&A session. So to start, let's start with what is SmartStax Pro with rnai technology. And really it's our next generation of corn rootworm protection. It's going to combine the proven benefits that you know and love with SmartStax technology, plus a unique rnai-based mode of action. So it'll be the first product with 3 modes of action for corn rootworm control. And it'll be a pyramided product with multiple modes of action for both above ground pests and below ground pests, as well as tolerance to glyphosate and glufosinate. So that's SmartStax Pro with rnai technology in a nutshell. Now you may be asking, so you've mentioned rnai technology. So how does rnai technology work? And the way I like to think about SmartStax Pro technology is it's really that 1-2 punch against corn rootworm. So you have the proven BT traits within SmartStax that are also in SmartStax Pro to give that jab. And then it comes back with the hook with the rnai technology. And what rnai does is it interferes in a naturally occurring process within the corn rootworm to stop the production of a specific protein vital to its life. So essentially, the corn rootworm feeds on the roots, and then the BT and then the rnai technology go to work to really take it down, and it'll be a powerful foe for those corn rootworm larvae. So when we look at what 2022 looks like in 2023 and what to expect, we're planning on going commercial in our Bare-owned brands. So that's the Cal channel and some of our regional brands for 2022. The hybrids are going to be limited in terms of volume and products, and we're going to be announcing that late fall of 21. So that announcement's going to be coming here in the next couple months. And we're really going to be highlighting or focusing our RM 100 to 110 products within the highest risk of corn rootworm pressure. So you can see on the right side of the screen here, the primary market that we're really going to be focusing on SmartStax Pro with rnai technology. And then the secondary market, we're hoping to get some volume out in those territories, but I would expect more volume to be in those territories come 2023 when we plan to ramp up our supply to meet our U.S. demand. And that'll be in both our Bare-owned brands as well as our seed partners as well. So looking forward to that. All right, so I'm going to pass it over to Safir, who's really going to talk through kind of the meat and potatoes of the presentation, and then we can always come back with any questions as needed. Safir, I'll take it away.
Hey, Travis and team, thank you for setting us up. And if you could move to the next slide, please. So I'll start with the just in general where the corn root pressure has been for the last couple of years and where we see it in the coming years, and then give you some ideas on what the corn root damage looks like and how we rate it and what it means in terms of yield losses. And then we'll talk about the trials that we did this year and the results and a few pictures from the field. And I'll explain things as we go, but if things are not clear, please make sure to add those in the Q&A and we'll answer those as we finish with the presentation. If you're a farmer out there or if you are somebody who's related to the industry, you know corn root pressure has been high, especially since last year. There was quite a few cases where we were hearing in the news, especially in the Midwestern states. And then this year again, it was pretty hot and heavy. What we have over here for you is the risk maps that we generate off of our beetle monitoring data. So we have about 1,500 fields every year where we monitor the corn root beetles, and we put these sticky traps and we get the results back. And then based off of those counts, we predict what the following year may look like. I think that gives us a pretty good indication. So to the left over here, we have a heat map that was generated off of the 2019 data, forecasting what 2020 might look like. And then to the right, we have the heat maps that were generated based off of the data that was collected in 2020, forecasting what 2021 might have looked like. And these heat maps, they kind of help us understand where the pressure where the pressure areas are or where it is moving, and how heavy in some areas are. They are not really absolute, but I think if you're looking at regional levels, they do really help you understand how the corn root pressure is moving and where it might be in the following years. So this is generated every year, roughly about 1,500 or so fields. Next slide, please. While I don't have the maps from the fields that we had in 2021 forecasting what 2022 may look like, what we have over here is just a rough indication of what 2022 might look like. In the past, to give you a rough idea, when we put these sticky traps out in a field on an average, let's say in 2018, 2019, if we were to go and look at those traps, they stay there in a field for about 7 days, and then we come back and we do the counts, and then that's how we determine the threshold. And if you look at the guides from the universities, especially from the Iowa State, they recommend that if you have 2 beetles per trap per day, on an average, that is basically reaching that threshold of where you will see economic injury if you don't do any of the best management practices to control the corn rootworm for the following year. So keep that in mind. In the past, when we did these traps and we would bring the counts back, and it would be 15, 20 beetles on a trap in a week. Now, last year there were quite a few cases where we saw these, and this year there was a lot more cases where we saw these kind of situations where you have 150 to 200 beetles on a trap. So a lot more activity. And I wouldn't be surprised when we generate the maps in the next week or two. We will see a lot more reds on the maps I showed before. Just to give you a rough idea, in the past, in 2019, when we looked at all of our corn fields, we had about 11% of those 1,500 or so fields that went above this threshold of 2 beetles per trap per day. In 2020, when we looked at the same data, for similar number of fields, it was about 22% of the fields that went above this threshold. Now, I was looking just the other day with 1,000 fields we have so far, it is 36% of those fields that are above this threshold. So I think we had a lot heavier year this year. And if the weather continues to be the way it was in 2020, late 2020, early 2021, we will probably see another heavy year in 2022 from the corn rootworm side of things. Of course, the big thing of this is if we get nice spring rains, some heavy ones, especially around that late May, early June timeframe, we will see some drowning and we'll see some effects of this, and that may reduce the pressure, but that's a big if. We don't know for sure. But if we just have to look at this data, we can see it's going to get pretty heavy. Next slide, please. Now I have a few slides over here. I know some of you may be familiar with the Qrome one and work day to day, but there might be people who don't know or who don't interact with it on day-to-day basis. So we put these few slides over here for the reference. When you look at the corn damage, normally you would see the feeding scars. Means the corn larva came and they fed on the roots a little bit and they died. In heavier cases, you would see the tunneling and you would see the pruning. In this case, we put an example over here where you are seeing pretty heavy feeding on it. And when we do the damage scoring on these, we are scoring the top 3 nodes right into the brace roots. So each circle of roots around the stem is basically considered as a node. And then you look at the whole node and you say, okay, what percentage of that node is damaged? And that's how you score it. If it is 100% damage, it gets a score of 1. If it is 70% damage, it gets a score of 0.7, and so on and so forth. And then you add all 3 nodes, and that's your final score. So what that score really means in terms of yield losses, if you look at some of the data that has been generated in the past, and we do have a reference over here, it talks about if you lose one node or if you get a score of 1 on the node injury score, that is basically your 15% yield loss. And if you have all 3 nodes gone or all 3 nodes are damaged, you could be looking somewhere closer to 45% yield loss. So quite significant yield loss just coming from the root one. Pretty heavy. Next slide, please. Here is another way of looking at it in the field. When you look at different areas, different environments, one thing that comes clearly out of that is if you have different technologies, they will show up differently. You may have the example over here I have all the way to the left is SmartStax Pro, where you're seeing very little damage. All the way to the right is we have our non-corn treated products. In this case, it is VT Double Pro. So you can see a lot more damage on it. That's one thing, technology differences. The other differences that you'd see is the pressure differences. If you are in an area where you have normal or low pressure, you will not see a whole lot of damage regardless of the technologies you have out there. But if you are in these heavy pressure areas, you are likely to see more damage, even on the technologies that have the protection. And these are the scores. I mean, these are just rough ideas to get you situated. And when you look at the scores, finally, this is what we see in the field. Next slide, please. That was below ground. Then above ground, typical symptoms of corn root feeding is this goosenecking or lodging. In severe cases, you would see the corn flat on the ground. Normally, you would see what I'm showing over here in the picture to the right. This is a non-corn root protected product, so you can see severe lodging in the same field. To the left over here, we have SmartStax Pro, which looks nice and standing. One thing we did with these pictures, and you'll see a few more of these, is we took the score that came off of those plots in that field. So you will see the averages over here, and when you look at these pictures. So keep that in mind. If we show a root, it is the average of 10 rows. If we show a plot, if you show a picture of like we are showing over here, that is the average of that whole plot, not just one plant you are looking at. So keep that in mind as we look at these pictures. Next, please. Now we will talk a little bit about the trial that we conducted this year. And this was a large strip trial planted at 80 locations. Purpose of this trial was to get a landscape view of the technologies, mainly SmartStax Pro and SmartStax, and compare it against some of the competitor technologies that are out there. So we had Optimum Acre Max and Qrome from Corteva, and then we had Durocade from Syngenta. And then as a check, we had VT Double Pro. So VT Double Pro would be our non-corn root treated check in this case. And then we also had the VT Double Pro with soil applied insecticide in these trials. One thing to keep in mind is that not all of the locations had the insecticide applied on them because of the growers' limitations on the equipment. So the data we will show today, or we'll talk about, was collected from the 40 locations, and I'll explain a little bit in the next slide as well how it was collected. But now out of those 40 locations, we had 29 locations where SAI was applied. So keep that in mind. And down to the bottom left over here, we have the breakdown of the regions where these trials were conducted and where they were. Again, large strip trials, most of the cases, 8 rows or more, 500 to 1,000 feet long in the length. Next, please. Here we have a map of our locations, and this would show all 80 locations. The way we categorize these locations were, if we looked at our non-conroute rated product, and we said if VT double pro at a location was rated below 0.5 on the node injury score, we call those locations as a very low pressure locations. And we did not collect the root data from those locations. And the reason is, if VT double pro, which is not protected from conroute traits, has that low of a score, you are likely to see very low score on these technologies that have the conroute protection on it. So whether it is us, whether it is the competitor, you will see likely very little differences between them. So that's why we decided not to dig those 40 locations. There's a lot of work that goes into that, and then at the end of the day, if you don't really get to see much differences, it's not really worth spending too much effort into that. So we did not dig those 40 locations. And on the map, if you look at it, the dots that have the blank, no color in them, those are those 40 locations where we did not dig the roads. And then we had another 6 locations where we had the VT double pro that was rated between 0.5 to 0.75. And those are the locations where we call them as a low pressure locations. And on the map, you can see them in the yellow dots. So only 6 of the locations out of the 40 that were left were the low pressure locations. And at these locations, when we look at us versus the competitors or versus our own internal technologies, there were no significant differences between the SmartStax Pro, between SmartStax, and between Qrome and Duracates. There were no significant differences. So when I show you the data in the next slide, we will not talk about these 6 locations because these were pretty low pressure locations. And the message is, when you have low pressure, you're not likely to see differences between different technologies. Everything works more or less the same way. Even if you see some numerical differences like we saw in our cases, statistically, there were no significant differences over there. Then we had another 34 locations, and out of those 34 locations, we had 15 where we had the VT double pro rated at 0.75 to 1.5 on the node injury score. So pretty heavy pressure locations. We call them medium to high pressure locations. On this map, if you look at it, the orange dots are those 15 locations. Then we had another 19 locations where we had the VT double pro between 1.5 to all the way to 3 on the node injury score, and we call them very heavy pressure locations. On this map, you can see the 19 dots in the red. So overall, if you look at it, out of the 80 location, 40 of them, no data collected on those for the root injury score. The rest of the 40 where we collected the data, 6 of them were low pressure locations. We will not show you, but I already described those. And then we will show you the 34 locations data in the next slide. Here we have all the technologies that were in this trial, and this data is across 34 locations. All the way to the left over here is VT double pro, that was our check, so non-conroute protected check. And then all the way to the right, we have the SmartStax Pro. So this is again coming from 34 locations. When you compare SmartStax Pro against anything else out there, it looks great. You have a little above 1/4 of a node damage, and this is more or less consistent with what we had seen in the previous years of testing SmartStax Pro in our trials. Then you look at SmartStax, and that looks really good, especially when you compare it against some of the competitors. Although these scores are a little bit higher than what we normally like to see with the conroute traded products, we have to keep in mind that a lot of these locations, at least 19 of those locations, were the locations that we consider very heavy pressure locations. And those are the areas where we normally recommend the growers to follow the BMPs, whether it is the crop rotation or the scouting and beetle monitoring and managing them through some of these other techniques, and not solely relying only on the technology. So keep that in mind when you look at this data too, and keep it as a reference too. But when we compare against the competitors over here, you can clearly see quite a bit of difference. It's almost a quarter of a node between SmartStax and Qrome, and a little higher with the Duracade over here. So I think relatively speaking, is much better. SmartStax Pro, which is coming, like Travis mentioned earlier, with 3 mode of actions for the cone root worm, and that does show up over here. It is that additional mode of action that is coming from the RNAi is showing a good benefit over here, even in these heavy feeding areas. So this is the data that we collected from 34 locations. One thing I should point out over here is the VT double pro with the soil applied insecticide. We do not recommend the soil applied insecticides with our technologies like SmartStax or SmartStax Pro, but we do recommend it with the VT double pro, where you don't have the cone root worm traits. And in those cases, we do generate this data as a part of our BMPs to show to the growers that in the cases where they don't where they had problems with the technologies, that they have options where they can go with the VT double pro with an SAI. And this year looked like SAI did a good job. In a lot of cases, we had timely rains that came in time, and they were not too heavy, especially when they needed them in that early June, late May time frame, and they worked really good. So that showed up over here. But I think relatively speaking, compared to the other technologies, I think both SmartStax Pro look really, really good here. Next slide, please.
Pierre, can you give everyone context of what the letters mean too, just for those that may not have seen that before?
Yes. So the letters over here show the statistical significance. So we ran the significance at 90% confidence interval. And if you look at a letter, and if you see same letters on the 2 bars, means there's no significant differences. The example would be if you're looking at the Duracade and Qrome, both have B in common, and means there is no statistically significant difference between Duracade and Qrome. And also when you look at Qrome and Acre Max Extreme, both share C between them. That means that there's no statistical significant difference between Qrome and Acre Max Extreme. So if you look at SmartStax versus Acre Max Extreme or versus Qrome, they have different letters. Means statistically, SmartStax is significantly different or better in this case versus both Qrome and Acre Max Extreme, and then also with the Duracade. So that's what stats tells you. Here in my summary, what we did was we went at all 34 locations and we looked at it location by location. So this was just a comparison of numbers by the numbers, and say out of these 34 locations where the cone root worm pressure really matters, where the growers really need protection, how are these technologies looking, one versus the other one? So we are comparing against Qrome over here. So we looked at SmartStax Pro location by location. We went on all of them, and 100% of the time, SmartStax Pro was better rated than the Qrome. That was the case 100% of the time. But when we compared Qrome against SmartStax, 79% of the time, SmartStax was better in these 34 locations than the Qrome. So this was just a number-to-number comparison across all 34 locations. The places where we really saw these technologies shining were the places, whether it is SmartStax or SmartStax Pro, what these pressures where what we call them as a medium to high pressure. So those were the locations where we had between 0.75 to 1.5 on the node injury score for double pro. So those are the places where we really saw these technologies shining and do a really good job. And that's what our recommendations are too, that those are the places you plant these technologies and they'll do a really good job. Then the places where we had extreme pressures, and these are the cases where the growers may have cone on cone for, in some cases, 5 years or more than 5 years. And we have pretty heavy feeding in those cases. In those areas, we normally recommend growers to do the BMPs, whether it is crop rotation or a careful scouting and then managing your beetles through the season, and then bringing that pressure down, and then combining them with the technologies. In those cases, we recommend that, and not position the technologies as a standalone solution. So we make sure that we are promoting some of these other practices too, besides the technologies in these heavy pressure areas. But we know that crop rotation may not be a solution for every grower. there are growers who have the dairy farms, or there are growers who are in a long-term contract, and for any reason they can't rotate to a crop like a soybean. So in those cases too, if you compare our technologies that we have, SmartStax in the market and SmartStax Pro coming next year in the market, and even in those heavy pressure areas too, they are better than anything that we have from the competition side. So, but ideally, we would promote the BMPs in these very heavy pressure areas. Over here, we have a few examples, and this is just took a node injury score of 1.08. And what does that mean in terms of yield losses? On an average, if you look at the areas where we normally see corn root pressure, I think it's fairly safe to assume that you would have around 200 bushel yield in those areas. So if we assume that average yield in those areas is 200 bushel, with a node injury score of 1.08 and a loss of 15% with a node loss, you're looking at roughly about 32 bushel yield loss over here. So quite significant yield loss in terms of just losing that a little over a one node. In this case, we are showing with the Qrome. Over here, we took a few pictures that came from the field. Our agronomists and our TDRs took these pictures. Over here, you are looking at, on the top, we have 30 roots that came from SmartStax Pro. These were 30 roots in a row. And then on the bottom, you see the 30 roots that came from the SmartStax. And then the second from the top is your Qrome, and the third one is the Durocare in this case. And then the Double Pro on the bottom, that's a check. So these were 30 rows dug, and they are sitting just the way they were sitting in the field. I don't think we really need to look at the damage a whole lot. You can look at the root masses, and that will tell you the story. How nice and clear SmartStax Pro looks compared to the competitors over here. And then we also have scores over here to what those technologies were rated in that field. This picture is coming from Minnesota. This is coming from Iowa, where we are showing both above ground and below ground from the same fields. To the left over here, we have SmartStax Pro, which was rated at 0.1. Very small feeding that you can clearly see in the pictures that we have from that plot. And to the right, we have Qrome, where we see the typical symptom of the lodging or goosenecking, and then also it showed up on the root injury damage too. In this case, it was rated at 2.3. So this one thing I think we also have to keep in mind too, that this was a field where a grower had more than 7 years of corn on corn. So pretty heavy pressure field over here that we are looking at. Another picture from Iowa, just again comparing a SmartStax Pro with a Qrome hybrid in this case. So on the bottom you can see the score and when the pictures were taken. Clearly, I mean, one thing I think that really affects is your root mass, and you're not really losing only the roots and stability. You're also losing the ability to take the water and the nutrients too from the ground, and that becomes obvious with the heavy pressures too. Now we have a couple of pictures over here comparing SmartStax with a Qrome. In this case, these are coming from a very heavy feeded field. So this was a long-term corn on corn field, and you can see the score in both cases. It was high, but relatively speaking, SmartStax rated much better than the Qrome in this case too. And you can see the damage too that showed up on the roots too, and it's reflected in the score of the 10 roots that we dug from that in Illinois. Here another coming from this one is from Illinois. So again, SmartStax compared with the Qrome products in this case, you can see again clearly. Even if these are not close-up pictures, you can clearly tell the root mass, and then also how you can see the browning in the roots that you typically see with the heavy root when feeding in this case that you can see clearly too. With this, I'll hand it over to Ryan, and he's going to have a couple of slides on the key takeaways.
Okay, can you hear me okay? Excellent. Hey, thanks for the time this morning, and Travis Saphir, great job kind of walking us through this new technology. And I'm just going to kind of wrap us up here with some of the key takeaways from the presentation. The first one is just really to highlight that, SmartStax Pro with RNA technology will be the most effective trait on the market for controlling corn rootworm. And it does bring with it 3 modes of action. So 2 of the BT modes of action that you would see with SmartStax, plus the first ever use of RNAi technology to control corn rootworm, which is very exciting. RNAi technology works very differently than the BTs. The BTs are damaging the gut, right, of the insect. The RNAi technology actually stops the production of a key protein within the rootworm larva, and that protein is required for survival. So by taking that away, the rootworms die. So we bring that new mode of action into play, which is a big driver, I think, behind why we're seeing the results that Safir just walked us through. Obviously, our established best management practices, they need to be followed when using SmartStax Pro technology. So insect resistance management is a key part of that, and Safir kind of highlighted some of those points in his talk as well. I think another key point here is that SmartStax technology and SmartStax Pro both offer significantly better protection versus any of the competitive platforms in our trials. And so we, again, had 34 locations across the Midwest that had medium to very high corn rootworm pressure. You can go to the next slide. So what can you expect in 2022? Well, we will be able to offer SmartStax Pro kind of on a limited basis, limited products, limited volume. But we'll be focusing on key launch geographies, and we'll communicate more on what those geographies are and what those hybrids and volumes are just a little bit later here in the fall. We anticipate that these will expand quite a bit when we get into 2023, and we can even expect that they will be available through licensees at that time, but more information to come there for sure. And finally, I mean, if you're a grower or know of growers who are interested in trying this new technology, contact your local Bayer representative and visit smartstaxpro.com to learn more about the product. Thank you, Travis. I'll pitch it back to you.
Awesome. Thank you all. So let's go to questions if we can. And we can kind of go through anything that pops up. So I'm going to stop sharing for right now so I can see the questions, and then we can go through the questions. So what is RM 100 to 110? So that is you probably saw that in one of my slides at the beginning, and that's just referencing the relative maturity of 100 to 110. So the individual products and the types of products that we're going to be coming out with SmartStax Pro for 2022. And next question. And I'll probably kick this over to Safir or Ryan. For fields conventionally managed tillage, were they all the same? Also, did any of the test plots use cover crops? And how do cover crops affect corn rootworm pressure in general? So a couple of questions in there, Safir.
So some of these fields may be conventional till, but majority of them would be the no-tills, depending on the areas where they were and what the growers' practices were. In general, we don't dictate that, and we follow what growers are. These were large-scale trials, and they were done with the growers' equipment, and in their fields, so not small plot research fields. So we normally go with the flow on that, but we collect that information. This is the first look that we are presenting to you guys today, but our hope is that when the harvest data comes in, and we'll look at all that information and bring it together. So still more to come on that. Cover crop, I don't have the answer on that to see how many of these fields did have cover crop. Again, that would be a practice that if a grower had that on the rest of his farm, he will likely have in this field as well. Ryan, I don't know if you have any comments on the cover crops with the corn rootworm beetle management. I don't really have much on that.
I don't have anything beyond that, Safir. I think you hit it you hit it right there. We probably would have to go back and just take a look at the data and see how many of those locations may have had a cover crop. I don't think it would have been a huge number, but that's certainly something that we can look at.
All right, so next question. When do you expect to know how much SmartStax Pro units we will have to sell for 2022? So we're going through that process now and trying to get all the results in. I would expect that that will occur after our internal deployments. So hopefully in that late November, December timeframe, we'll be able to get that information out to everyone. Next question, will Pioneer be licensing SmartStax Pro, and if so, when? So with Corteva, we have licensed out the corn rootworm free trait within SmartStax Pro with rnai technology. Beyond that, you'll have to connect with Corteva and Pioneer on if and when they will be utilizing that trait in any of their traits or utilizing that beyond where we sit today. Next question, why is SAI or seed applied insecticide not a recommended practice for SmartStax Pro? Saphir, can you answer that one?
Yes, so one of the biggest reason is that when we get these technologies approved through USDA, EPA, big part of that is that they will reduce the use of the chemicals of the soil applied insecticide in this case. And we don't recommend for that reason. It's not part of our product registration with EPA. The second is that the soil applied insecticides don't really help you manage resistance. They may manage your rootworm damage for a grower on a limited scale, but they don't really manage resistance. And for us to know how our technologies are performing out in the fields and know for sure that technologies are not having challenges, we need to know that in a simple way and not get masked by a soil applied insecticide. So that's the reason we don't recommend. We know that there are growers who use those, but that's not a recommendation that comes from us for our technologies.
Saphir, I'll kick this question over to you as well. Is there a yield penalty or yield drag with SmartStax Pro versus SmartStax under low corn rootworm pressure?
We have a separate breeding program that runs and that focuses only on SmartStax and SmartStax Pro. And we don't advance hybrids that may yield less than what our checks are or what we already are selling in the market. And I think that gives us a really good confidence. Another thing is with SmartStax Pro, everything we will bring is a brand new genetics. We are not recycling anything that was sitting in the shelves somewhere. So that's not happening. The other thing is also you have to look at is what the penalties are that come with the corn rootworm pressure. So we also have to keep those in mind and the yield losses that come in mind. So I think when we put it as a package together, those hybrids make a lot of sense. And from our side, I know our restrictions are pretty strict when it comes to the hybrid advancement process. We don't advance anything that's going to be not perform on the high yield part of it, because that's more important than anything else when it comes to the growers and goal, I guess.
Awesome. Next question is, in this trial, it's kind of expected that SmartStax Pro with the 3 modes of action would outperform other technology. Were you surprised by how SmartStax performed against the competition? Maybe I'll kick that over to Ryan, and Saphir can double up on the question there.
Yeah, and I don't think it was a surprise. I mean, we've been testing SmartStax Pro for a lot of years, and definitely had high expectations for performance, and that again kind of played out. This is the first time because it was recently fully approved for planting, right? I think last spring. So that allowed us to take this out to a little bit of a broader look, in these strict trials that we showed you here today. And it was great to see our assumptions, or to see our previous data kind of bear out on this kind of landscape level view. SmartStax itself, again, we would have liked to have seen that maybe a little bit lower, ideally, but it probably performed about the way we would have expected. We know that in some cases, we do see some product performance inquiries on it, but overall, still pretty solid performance by and large, and definitely ahead of where the competition was. So when we think about Qrome, we think about Duracade, we think about AcreMax Extreme. So not surprised that it performed ahead of the competition. And again, I think it was fairly close to our economic damage threshold, which is about what we would have expected there.
Sophia, anything to add to that?
I think Ryan covered it well. This has been consistent with what we had seen in the previous years as well.
Sounds great. And then I think Sophia answered this question previously in a previous question, but will the SmartStax Pro lineup be brand new hybrids or a mixture of already used hybrids? Sophia, you want to kind of cover that?
Yeah, so they will be all brand new hybrids. I think it's another month from now when we will do our advancements for what is going into the market. So all brand new hybrids.
All righty, and that's the last question that we have at the moment. Let me make sure nothing sneaked into the chat. No, I think we're good. So maybe stay on for another minute if there's any other questions. But while we're waiting on that, I just want to say thank you all for tuning in this morning. Extremely excited about the results that we saw with the trials. Even more excited that we get to bring the SmartStax Pro with RNAi technology to market in 2022, and then see how it performs and showcase how it performs in 22, so that we can ramp up the volumes in 23 and get it out on more acres. But overall, looking forward to 2022 and hope that harvest goes well for everyone and everyone stays safe. Look for a lot of news on SmartStax Pro with RNAi technology on smartstaxpro.com. And I'm sure you'll be seeing more of it and more about it here in the near future as well. So thank you for your time. Have a good one.